You're listening to the Behind the Pipeline podcast, the show that helps your team sell more, faster. It's brought to you by Rick Williams, a leader in B2B sales enablement and go-to network selling. This show features revenue leaders sharing their stories, strategies, and solutions that helps you build repeatable revenue growth. Find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe now to the Behind the Pipeline podcast. Let's go.
Hello, today I'm joined by Hassan Erakat, who is the SVP of Expansion at Bayzat here in Dubai. Welcome to the show, Hassan. It's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Rick. Appreciate it.
Brilliant. Hassan, you're leading the charge in expansion sales, upselling, cross-selling to existing customers.
Yep.
Why do you believe this focus on expansion is so crucial, especially in today's market conditions?
Yeah. Look, I think it's pretty simple in reality. If you can increase the number of products a customer uses from your company, it becomes harder for that company to leave you as a vendor. And so, with that said, you have to ensure that you're providing value with those additional products you're selling them and not misusing their trust. But that's really it's going to increase retention. It's going to, of course, increase the revenue per customer, which ultimately, makes it much more likely for them to renew.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think there's two aspects to this. If you're only selling one product, then clearly, you got to upsell and just try and sell more of it to your customers. But there's a lot of companies have more than one product in their portfolio.
Yeah.
And I just wondered, have you ever done any analysis to see what your typical customer has in terms of sort of number of products versus what else you can sell? It's what I call white space. Is that something have you understood that and done some analysis and say, right, on average, our customers have 3 products out of 5 or anything like that?
Yeah. So we actually, the reason we launched the expansion team about 16 months ago or so was that we saw that actually there was a missed opportunity to expand. So we have probably, I want to say, if you count every part of every feature, I wouldn't say each one is a unique SKU, but we have at least 5-6 products we can sell to customers. And so within the Work-Life platform, which is our HRMS payroll solution, there are many different features that some companies use because they don't have anything, or other companies that are using a part of it. And so there's an opportunity to upsell, say, something like performance management, right? And so we did an analysis, and actually on average of our 2,500 plus customers, we weren't providing more than maybe 2 products to the majority of them. And so we saw that was a huge opportunity for us. And the reason why we weren't able to cross-sell effectively or as much as we would have liked was that, ultimately you have a new business team, you have an account management or CS team, and they're focused ultimately on 2 very different things. New business logos ultimately create more revenue for the business, right? More logos, more revenue, because the tickets on new business are typically larger. Right. And so to have an expansion team, which is why a lot of companies may not have one, is the unit economics may not make sense. Because if you don't have enough SKUs to cross-sell, having a dedicated team to that, you're not going to be able to make targets large enough or make those numbers match to actually dedicate a team to it. And so for the first, say, 7 years of Bayzat's existence, we had specific people that were handling new business, specific people handling renewals. And technically the renewal team would upsell. However, it was more of a reactionary upsell. If the customers showed interest, then they'd be like, oh, okay, cool. We have this other product that might work. Because you also, if you're measured on net retention revenue, you're focused on, hey, I just want to keep my customer. I don't necessarily want to push them to other products that could rock the boat if they don't work.
Right. Yeah. No, it's an interesting one because I guess it's to a degree the maturity of the organization as well. Yeah. It might well be you've either launched additional products or you've had a merger or you acquired other organizations. But yeah, your traditional, relatively new sort of startup is new logo and then possibly a CS team.
Yep.
That customer experience that sometimes will do the renewals as well. Increasingly, I'm seeing that more separated into a renewals team, just because there's a degree of commerciality that perhaps you don't want or you don't have with the CS team, right? So customer experience is really about getting more usage and giving a good customer experience, obviously, and getting value from the product. And sometimes that can conflict with the renewals, which is more commercial, and just sometimes they're not the right personality types, right? So someone who's very good at educating and so on isn't necessarily someone who's wants to even or comfortable with or have the skills and background to go on to do the renewals. So I do see that separating. Yeah. But you're right. That makes it, because my question was going to be, what's stopping people doing that? And I guess it's the economics are you need to have enough other products that you can sell such that it's worth hiring a team and paying them the cost base and the salaries around that to still, to grow that.
And I think the personality differences, right? So like you have, I would say expansion personality needs to have that kind of sales drive and willing to kind of push the envelope a bit versus to your point, CS or customer success is going to be more of, hey, let me pay attention to the usage metrics. Are there any risks here? How do I educate them? And so, we're very fortunate that even our CS team has that kind of sales motion really moving in the right direction, but it's not always folks that want to carry a target. And so I think, depending on the organization, people find that, the term quota a lot of times will scare folks who don't have that maybe sales background. And so I think that's another thing is that to get the kind of people who can balance both, hey, I have a target, but ultimately I need to care about the customer's success, by definition. And that should kind of guide their day to day, hopefully.
So if you take your team as an example, your expansion team, do they work with customer success? So when you're hiring, because that sounds like hiring is always a challenge for any organization, just for anything, frankly, in sales. What have you learned in terms of the right, what lessons can you share maybe in terms of hiring that type of fit? Because that sounds, maybe possibly a bit more challenging. So, what can you share around the hiring side of that and the right personalities that fit that?
Yeah, look, I think ultimately, I would say it's similar to what you would have in sales or CS, which is, the profiles we were interviewing for are folks that have sales backgrounds or customer success background, where they're handling some kind of renewal. And then you look for what fits within your company. I think ultimately for us, having so many product SKUs, you need folks that have at least been in some kind of SaaS background, or at least having experience handling multiple products or doing demos online. I think for us, we also look at folks that have worked with other teams. So for example, if I'm interviewing someone and they're doing the full cycle, meaning they're doing the prospecting, they're doing the sales, they're doing the implementation, and they're doing the support, I don't necessarily know that that's a good fit for Bayzat, because you need to be able to work with other departments and leverage people for their strengths. And if you have someone you've been used to, it's not that they're a bad, salesperson, they could be actually excellent. But if they've been used to being that lone wolf personality, right, now you have to get that person to now engage with 3-4 different departments, there's going to be some friction there, because not everybody works at the same pace. And if you're not used to working with other departments, you may start, becoming complaining, or the culture fit just not necessarily be there. So I try to look for examples of people who have worked with other departments. Give me an example of how you've had disputes with other departments. How do you come to fix that ultimately to give the customer the right outcome, and looking for those kind of personalities. It's definitely not easy though.
No, it sounds to be quite challenging. You're looking for someone who can collaborate with customer success, potentially collaborate with, I'm guessing, maybe support.
Implementation.
Implementation. Yeah. And I've always sort of considered that to be you got to sell internally to some extent.
100%.
And represent that customer. So get to know the customer and have their back, and rally the troops and the people and get them to back you, and because you're doing the right thing. Yep. And that is a difference. It's definitely a different skill. I've done install base selling in the past when I worked for LinkedIn, and you do need to go and work with different teams, different organizations, because you're trying to prioritize things for the client. Because if you've got a client who's, let's just say, unhappy about something for whatever reason, you're the ambassador. That's how I see it. You're the ambassador within your organization. Yeah. and clearly your organization is paying your wage, your salary, but you can't sell something new to them if you've got a customer who's upset. You got to make sure they're really happy, they're a happy customer, and they're in a good place, and just take ownership of that, I guess. So there's some, I think there's.
So what we did actually is, early on, to get everyone's buy-in. Ultimately, it wouldn't work, especially if, say, CS previously was doing these upsells, right?
Right.
Now you're bringing in a new team that's potentially taking, I don't say food off their table, potentially taking an opportunity to make up for a lost account, right? So if I lose an account, but then I'm able to cross-sell another account with a higher ticket, I'm essentially bridging the gap from my target, right? And so when you bring in an expansion who's now doing these upsells, we really have to get everyone's buy-in, right? And so we went to our account management team, went to the CS team, and because of the various products we have, say, hey guys, look, expansion is going to sit kind of in the middle, but to ensure the customer experience, we're not going to be reaching out without making sure that things are okay to start that outreach. We don't necessarily need the introduction, because we just wanted to have a sit down with you to understand the account. So we created pods, and we created these kind of weekly or bi-weekly meetings with the pods to be able to share, okay, hey, I did some research. So what I've told the expansion team is, hey, if you go up to those meetings and you're not prepared and you haven't researched the maybe 5 accounts you want to talk about, that's on you. You can't blame the CS person for, they don't want to introduce me. Ultimately, you got to take ownership of looking through the account, making sure there's no red flags or big issues, the usage is normal, and then approach, say, Rick as your CS and say, hey, Rick, I have this account that I identified within our pod. I think they could be a good fit for this product. This is why I think that. Let's go to them together. Because now that person has much more buy-in to introduce you to what they believe is their client, right? Yes, that's client, but ultimately it's your name on the line, right?
Yeah, exactly. We all tend to get protective about our clients, and customer success, rightly so, also get protective, and
100%.
They're concerned about jeopardizing a relationship. This maverick salesperson coming in with size 10 shoes, and
your tactics like sign now, or
exactly. But it is absolutely about collaboration, and I think working together, and then look, here's our joint plan of how we can go and increase and sell into this account, and ultimately while we're doing that, we're trying to give more value back to the client.
Exactly.
So if we do it right, customer success are going to be happy with that, because we're just giving more value to the client.
And the way you do that, to your point, is you have to have done your homework. Because if you can't make a case internally as to why you're going to reach out to a customer for a specific product, how are you supposed to make that case to the customer that they should care about that product?
Right. Yeah, you bang on. And that sort of leads us on to the next step around sort of doing the analysis, as a white space analysis, I would call it. Other people might call it something different, but, understanding what a client's already got today, what's their current economic situation, markets they work in, using those as potential triggers, as well as seeing what they don't have, to then try and figure out, well, what's the plan to go and sell more or whatever. You have taken a bit of a data-driven approach to this. So how did you figure that out?
Yeah. So look, I think as a leader, first you have to evaluate the data, right? And if you have a hypothesis, take a subset of those accounts within that database that you're using, and whether you're using, whatever CRM you're using, and test, kind of sanity check those accounts. Like, okay, based on this hypothesis, these are people I think we could target, and then evaluate. Say, okay, if it's working with the 10 accounts that fit this profile, what I would do is always start narrow, and then zoom out slowly. So, for example, I may say, I'm only going to target companies that are between 20 and 50 employees that are using at least these products. And then I'm going to zoom, and that may only yield, say, 10 customers. But if what I consider to be the ideal customer profile, if I don't fit with at least 70% of those 10, let's say, then my data points or my hypothesis is probably wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. And didn't you do something quite smart by doing some sort of tech data analysis?
So we use a BI tool, and essentially what we did is we pulled data points from our platform, from our users, right, along with our CRM, which is Salesforce, and we're able to track essentially, hey, these are the products they're using today, these are the number of users, and based on growth rates, based on certain features that they're accessing more, these are the products that we can then cross-sell into. So for example, if a customer is using our payroll solution and you can see that they have maybe 10 offices and a good portion of their folks are salespeople, probably a pretty safe assumption that those salespeople have expenses and we should be cross-selling them our expense module.
Right. Yeah.
And that's not a crazy thought. Like people that are outside of the office have expenses, and if they're not using our expense, they're probably using something else, which means it's an opportunity for us to sell them.
So, I mean, that takes a bit of technical know-how. How did you sort of take ownership of that? And what tips have you got for other sales leaders where maybe not so technical and trying to drive that innovation?
So I think it depends on what, again, the CRM that you're using. And I think every sales leader, I'm sure you can attest to it, every salesperson can say like CRM data is like, faulty at best. And so I think when you're developing it in the early days, especially, so, I think there's two different stages. One at the early stage company, two at a more advanced stage. And I think you have to really be honest around like where you're at and then try to make sense of the data and also make sense of how this data is getting input. Because if there's a lot of rules in place around, hey, the data has to be input in a certain way, then a lot of times you're just going to get bad data because the salesperson's just trying to like get through to the next stage, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, have you ever found problems with having too many sort of free-form fields and that sort of thing?
Yeah, definitely. So, we, in the early days, it was like we want to get as much information as possible. And then I think that's where you got to be honest with yourself that, hey, maybe we made this too complicated for our team as a sales leader. And what I realized is, the first version of building kind of our CRM environment, I realized that, hey, we probably had too many free text fields and we needed more multi-select or drop-down fields.
Right.
So that you can avoid, because the quality of free text is ultimately who's putting it in. It may be one word, or it could be 10 words. Whereas if you control the variables, which are, hey, loss reasons are 5 different ones and they're all would fit into this bucket, then at least you ensure that when you're running the data later, hey, they fit within these buckets. If we want more context, we can go into the CRM deeper and take a look. But at least we know the buckets that it's in. And then that's where ultimately, you've made it easier for your team to pick and it's not as nuanced. And then you can focus on actually extracting and what experiments you want to run based on that data.
Amazing. So you've basically created a bespoke system using a BI tool. What was the tool again? Was it Lookers?
We use Looker, which is a Google product,
Right.
and Salesforce is our CRM. And then of course, because we provide an HR payroll platform, the clients are using ours. So Looker helps to combine the data from all these various places.
So you're now able to present the sort of the best bets, if you like, to your sales team.
Yeah.
Excellent.
So there's a great book that I read a couple of years ago called Thinking in Bets. If you haven't read it, I love the game of poker. Mm-hmm. So this is it's written by a former poker professional, Annie Duke. I'm not sure if you know her. Great book because it talks about how, a lot of times you focus on the decision-making process. And you don't focus, you're focusing on the outcome, not the actual decision-making process. And if you're too outcome-driven, you're not thinking about actually, was this a good bet, right? So if you think of statistics and probability, you may not sell every customer who's considered, say, high cross-sale opportunity, but at least you're taking enough swings at those top 10, you should be able to close 7 or 8 of them, right? Versus if you're blindly approaching customers, you're actually not understanding, you may get lucky, right? And there's a luck component of all sales, right? And so I think it's thinking about the process, understanding that, hey, there's certain things that we've measured. It's not always going to be accurate. And this is where being open to, changing your hypothesis if it's wrong. And we've made those mistakes at Bayzat for sure. And say, okay, actually, with this new information, I realized that this was the wrong way of doing it.
So you sound like you like your maths and your stats, and
definitely you're looking at stats. You're looking at anecdotes, and I think a big one we didn't touch on yet, which is having the right tech stack to measure this. Right. I think in the early days there weren't really the types of tools that there are today in terms of what a client is saying in a meeting. How is the salesperson approaching that objection or that comment? And today with technology, I would say especially post 2020, post COVID, is that everyone's been much more comfortable doing meetings online, and that at least allows you to measure across your whatever. If you have 20 salespeople doing 100 meetings a week, have a bit more data points to actually go based off of.
Okay. So you're you're a California boy who's
Yeah.
now in Dubai. Share with me if you've got any insights around, selling in different cultural environments. I'm sure you've got some insights there.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm probably dating myself a bit, but so I've been in sales now over 15 years.
Yeah.
And, back in, say, 2009, 2010, if a company was using a CRM, they probably weren't really adhering to it accurately. And so in those days, a lot of it was the anecdotes that you pick up out in the field, right? And I think today you probably have at most white collar companies, at least 90% adoption on LinkedIn. You have a lot more information out on the web that you can pull from a company. There's, tools like Apollo and Lucia that you're getting people's phone numbers and emails, and you essentially can have a full on understanding of who you're reaching out to based on their social profiles before you even call. And so I think it's really important from a cultural perspective is to understand the background of the person you're calling. Because, in certain regions, I think especially here in this country, in the UAE, is you can't really make assumptions on, say, titles. A title means maybe more in the West than I would say here, because somebody who has a director of IT in the West, has buying power. Right. Or has some, especially influence. Whereas here, they may not have the same, even though they have the same title, because potentially the culture gap between that person and the CEO is much larger because the CEO is from, say, the US, that person's from Southeast Asia. And, in certain cultures, you're not really supposed to challenge what the quote unquote leader says. So I think it really depends on the company you're in. And also if they've empowered those employees and team members that they actually are bought into the decision. And it's not a decision based on fear.
It's interesting. I think it also applies in general anyway, in terms of someone might have what appears to be an influential title, but do they have the real buying power?
Yeah.
And I think it's easy to forget that and just sort of go with what people's titles are on LinkedIn rather than...
And there's a lot of variables, right? So like how long the person's been there. If I just became the SVP of Expansion at Bayzat and I just joined the company, I'm probably, in those first 6 to 12 months have a bit more opportunity to maybe make influence on, hey, I want to bring a tool that I used previously, right? But if I'm coming in as just a product manager for the first time and I want to change everything that we're doing from an HR perspective as a product manager when I never was in the space before, probably going to get some weird looks, right? So I think it also depends on the person's background as well, experience-wise.
So I think when we spoke before, you had a really interesting journey.
Yeah.
So tell me how you start off in sales.
Yeah, so I started my first official sales job, say B2B sales job, was at Cevion, which was a telecommunication provider in LA County. And the company was known for giving folks who had never really had sales experience an opportunity. And I'll never forget my interview, actually, because I told the recruiter, I said, look, if you probably approached me 2 years ago when I was right out of college, I don't think I could have done this job because I was, maybe a bit more idealistic. And I was like, oh, you expected a lot more out of your job. And this company actually takes you on what they call like a part of the interview is you go out with a sales rep to see how they cold call. And the whole job is outside sales. So you're expected to go to 60 to 70 businesses every day, pull business cards and pound pavement, as they call it.
That's hardcore.
And so you learn a lot about yourself because ultimately, if you don't come back with enough business cards, if you don't come back with enough appointments, it's only going to affect you. And culturally in sales, especially in the States, they'll put you on a PIP faster than you can, know what that stands for.
Right.
And so, it really comes down to like owning your space and really realizing that every day that I'm not doing something that's creating more opportunities, more activities, that I'm actually creating I'm behind the 8 ball, so to speak. And I'm gonna have to make that up at some point because the way the company ran is that if you'd get a territory for 3 months and then you move on to another territory and you couldn't say, go back into your old territory and sell unless you already had, say, something booked in meetings with them from before. But as soon as somebody else took over your territory, that's it. So all that maybe work of laying the foundation, you have to move fast to get through your whole territory.
So that sounds proper hardcore selling, right? I mean, that's like selling, knocking on doors.
Yeah, literally. Every door, every floor was the motto.
Go on. So you must have some stories to share. So give me a story of you're young, you're fresh out of college. It sounds like you're under a lot of pressure. But this sounds like Glenn Ross type stuff, right? So
I mean, there was times I'd walk into. I'll never forget. I walked into I don't remember what kind of business it was, and there was a sign on CBN was notoriously known for being like very aggressive. Right. So there were signs on buildings and doors, no soliciting, especially CBN. Literally, those were on buildings and on doors that people from my company were not allowed. And so I remember one time I walked in, and again, goes back to the point of like, you never know what you're walking into in terms of a customer. Maybe they were a customer and they're pissed off. You didn't know because we didn't have a CRM in that time. It was just kind of like, you go in, you see what happens. And before I could even introduce myself, the guy knew. And he just started cursing me out, saying, I've told your company, and we were a publicly traded company. And I was like, oh, your company, you're not allowed in here. Get the so-and-so out of my, I'm like, all right, yeah, man, like, sorry, like, I'll make a note, but I can't promise you that somebody else isn't going to come in here. Like, all I can do is, I know I won't come here again. So that's one. There's a time, so one of my territories was Compton, California. And I remember I got out of a meeting and I had like a little notebook and I'm like writing a bunch of notes and I'm wearing a suit. And I had a couple people come up to me and be like, yo, man, like, why are you giving us a ticket? Because I guess I was near their car. I'm like, first of all, like a detective wouldn't be giving you a ticket. Second of all, I'm working, man. I'm not, I'm no, so it's like you get yourself in some interesting scenarios. I remember I walked into a business once after like 5, 6 p.m. and the GM, she's like, young man, you shouldn't be out here alone at this time, just like that by yourself. I'm like, okay, I get it. So like, to me, it didn't matter because ultimately it was, I'm given a territory, I either make it work or I'm not going to have a job. And so, that was, I would say, an amazing entry into sales because I look at all the people that I worked with, all the colleagues I worked with, and they're all in very, strong positions. I was very fortunate to have an amazing sales leader who's pretty high up at DocuSign. And, I think paying it forward, and that's one of the things why I wanted to get into sales leadership. I was very fortunate to have great sales leaders who laid the foundation for me.
Yeah, I mean, I admire that. I mean, I always felt a bit disadvantaged that I never was an SDR. I went into sales from being a solution consultant, so I was a bit of a techie. And I always think, looking back, that was a great way to learn some of the, the fundamentals of selling because, it's about activity. Got to put the work in and, you got to grind it out and get to know your data, I guess.
Yeah.
You need to know from your data how many calls do you need to make generally to get how many connects and how many connects lead to a meeting and so on. And I think that's really important.
On that point, Rick, like I think there's two things that gets lost. So number one is you have to know what the company is doing as a whole, right? As if you're going in. So at that time at CBN, for example, it was hit 60 doors, you should get 2 meetings, right? And if you're making 40 calls an hour on the calling days, you should be able to set 1 meeting. And so if that's the company norm, so that's how they're going to measure success. But then you as a sales rep need to also know what do my metrics look like, right?
Yeah.
And if you can't meet that, so maybe it takes me 100 calls to get 1 demo. Well, then it just takes me 100 calls to make a demo. And if I need to make 2 demos a day, then I have to make 200 calls. So I think part of it is knowing what the inputs are to get to those, measuring it. Hey, how do I get better at those inputs? But ultimately, what matters is how many meetings I can have.
Yeah, and it might be when you're first learning, it sounds like a baptism of fire. You might not have your script or your pitch down. Have it.
Or
down.
Your script is just that; it's a script, and you're just reading, so there's nothing to come up with.
But surely you're going to learn through what I said, kissing a few frogs to find a prince. You're probably going to start to realize that. Don't just do the script, but read the situation and maybe adapt. If you an example of where you've had to you've gone in, you've had to read the situation and maybe change what you're going to say, maybe, or
100%. And so I'll never forget it. It was a tire shop, and I walked in, and I've been trying to reach the owner of the tire shop for some time, and everybody had told me it's a waste of time. Everybody who had my territory previously, like, you're never going to get this guy. He's stubborn. Right. from so-and-so country, like he's not going to listen to you. But I was like, okay, I know it's a good account. I have a pretty good feeling that these guys are probably overpaying on their telecommunication spend, because it seems very hard to get in there. It means nobody's able to really challenge status quo.
Okay.
And so I walked in there and I asked for the owner. At this point, I can't remember his name. I remember it from this time. I asked for him, and he came up and he said, okay, what's this about? I'm like, oh, I'm contacting you. This is why I found out about the business. And I had to go completely off script, because he's like, okay, I'll give you basically 30 seconds to give me your pitch.
Oh, the classic. I'll give you 30 seconds.
And I was like, okay, well, look, I don't know whether or not we can save you money, but from what I know about your company, from the calls and talking to your team when I come in here previously, it seems like there may be an opportunity. And I'll know pretty quickly, if you share with me all the details, whether or not I'll be straightforward with you. And if it's not going to work, it's not going to work, and I'll be out of your hair and you won't see me again. So he looked at me for a second, and I was, of course, nervous. And he's like, okay, my daughter's in the back. Go back there. Chef, prepare everything for you. And so I was just looking at the numbers, totaling everything up, really quick, so I can go to him. He said, okay, we can continue, basically. And so he came in, but essentially she handled most of it. He came in to kind of sign off on making the switch. And, it was a one call close, as they call it. And
great story.
It was yeah, it gave me confidence for sure. But it also made me realize, actually, the bigger takeaway was that what works for somebody else won't always work for you. And part of being a salesperson is to your point, you got to read the situation and realize who the buyer persona of the person I'm talking to. And, using, say, buzzwords, using certain tactics may not work, and you just need to be real. And also, it's much more impactful if you kind of give them an easy out, right? Say, hey, look, if it's not going to work, I'm going to be honest with you and tell you straightforward. And look, I think as a salesperson, I've always tried to maintain, say, a high level of integrity, because I've always looked at my customers as just that. If I was running a small business, I don't want my name as my brand, and I don't want somebody coming back a year from now, even though I'm not at the company anymore, saying, oh, I'll never buy from this person again because they told me something that wasn't true. As I try to coach my team to do the same thing.
I think that's a really good lesson in sales, because what you didn't do was, he gave you 30 seconds and you went into an elevator pitch, for want of a better word. Yeah. You didn't do that. You did the right thing, which was, okay, look, I don't know if I can help you. I need to diagnose the situation. Yeah. If you give me some time to go and do that, I'll be able to tell you. If I can't, I will not harass you, or my company will harass you ever again. And I think because you were just honest, open, didn't pitch, and humble, which I think is a great trait in salespeople, just being a bit humble, I think he respected that. Yeah. It's like, right, okay, this is a guy I can do some business with. Let's see what you got. Yeah. And in sales, sometimes that's all we need is the chance. Is like, especially when you're cold calling and sometimes you got 30 seconds and you go, okay, it's like, okay, look, I'm not going to do a pitch. I need to ask you a couple of questions. Yeah. It'll take 30 seconds. Are you open to that? And then I can tell you one way or the other.
100%.
And it's in the moment, it takes a bit of wherewithal to calmly just deal with that. So what you did there was great, but it's a very basic lesson, and I think it's a great lesson to do that. But I also think there's another lesson. You mentioned it. Don't believe what other people say about your territory. How many times have we been told, oh, you come in, it's what you got that territory. Oh, waste of time. Don't call that account. You're not going to get in there.
Happened to me on my first week. So Paramount, Rancho Dominguez, and Compton, heavily African-American neighborhood. The guy that was in my territory before me was about 6'2", former football player. And he comes to me the first week. He's like, man, good luck in that territory, because I killed it in there. And he was a top sales rep for that quarter that he was in that territory. Yeah. He's like, I went through every company that could be sold there. So I could have very easily went to my manager and said, hey, can I get another territory? Probably would have lost my job if I did that. Or just make it work. And I realized that how Gary, and I'll never forget the guy, used to manage his territory. I realized I had to approach it different, because he was a very much the owner's in the back, I'm going to go talk to him and just kind of invite himself in. And that worked for him. I knew I couldn't be Gary. I had to be Hassan, and I had to find a way that made sense for me, that's authentically myself.
Yes, exactly. It's finding your style, your approach. So it is you, not trying to be somebody else.
Correct.
Because people see through that so quickly. 100%. But I just love the such a great lesson. Just because someone said, there's nothing left in that area. I mean, how many times have we heard that?
Yeah.
And I know there's a sales manager of mine used to wind them up all the time. It's like, just go and sell and you might be surprised. Have a belief mindset. It's a bit like Ted Lasso, believe, right? You got to get out there and just go, just do your thing, trust the process, do the right thing. And you might well be surprised.
And look for to your point, is like, sometimes you have to look in unconventional ways. So if you hear something like, oh, this territory is tough, well, then let me find out what people have been doing in this territory. I can't do the same thing. I have to probably experiment with a few new opportunities here and to identify how I can get through it. So I think it's partially is understanding like, okay, this is what's been tried here. Mm-hmm. Trying the same approach isn't probably going to work. Let me try this one. And look, in every sales organization, there's deals that somebody lost that somebody else ended up winning. And it's because they didn't approach it the same way. I mean, I have a story even at Bayzat, so I like to manage some deals on my own just to make sure I still got it. And so a few years back, there was a client who we had pitched, and, the first year with my team member that we had pitched it didn't quite work out. And I learned from that, and I said, okay, the second year I went to him, I said, look, I know you have been with this broker for a long time. This was on the insurance side of the business. And I'm not saying that the broker's doing a bad job. I'm sure they're doing a great job. You've been with them for 6 or 7 years. But if we do what we did last year, and you're truly trying to make it an evaluation, you might as well not talk to any other broker, just talk to your broker. Because you can't give me, say, tier 2 providers to work with, and you're giving them all the tier 1 providers. And you want the tier 1 provider, then you're just essentially having people do work for no reason. So give me one provider. One. I'm only going to ask for one. If I can't get it done with that one provider, who I know I have a good relationship with, then you have made the right choice of renewing with your broker. And sure enough, we took the one provider. We were able to win the deal with that one provider and have kept the customer now 4 years running. And I think for me, the key takeaway was that sometimes as a salesperson, you have to be able to kind of put your money where your mouth is and take a shot. Mm-hmm. And I knew doing the same thing over again, a full market evaluation wasn't going to work. So I said, okay, give me one. If we can't do it, you'd be on your way. And sure enough, they've been with us ever since.
No, I like that because, so look, just doing the same thing over and over again is obviously insanity. I'm a big believer in trying to think creatively, do something a little bit different, take a different approach, do some more research, get an angle.
Yeah.
Just try it. You've got nothing to lose. It's go in, take a gamble, and if you don't try, you're never going to know. So I just don't believe in being defeatist. It's always like, all right, they haven't bought from us before or whatever. Okay, let's take a different approach. Let's back ourselves a bit here. Let's get some buy-in from the rest of my team and the company. Let's go for it. What is it that we're prepared to go in to do to win the business?
And you have to make sure the juice is worth the squeeze, as they say, right? It's like if you're focusing on a really low value account, is that really worth your time to try to,
Yeah, and that's as a rep, you should have done the analysis. Where's the upside in these accounts? Where's the big bets? Is a good term. And just going back to your betting analogy, but where's the big bets? Where if we put some time as a rep, as an organization, if we invested a bit of time, which ones could we win? And how do we leverage other people within the business? How can we leverage the executives in the business and so on? I don't think enough people do that. I think they just try and go for the easy wins rather than like, let's go for the bigger stuff. Let's be a bit more ambitious, but we might have to put a bit of work into it. But let's give it a go.
Yeah, and I think you got to know your customer too. So for us, a big value that we provide to our clients is the InsurTech, right? But this company wasn't that big. They were maybe 20 people, pretty static environment, not a lot of turnover. So actually, like the InsurTech for them wasn't really a big sell. Mm-hmm. And if you try to approach, because that's what your company tells you to do, say, hey, make sure you pitch this because this is the reason. I knew that wasn't going to work with these guys because it was going to be too easy because I knew enough about their business to just say, well, we don't really need something like this because we don't have a lot of turnover. We don't have a lot of employees and everyone at the company pretty much goes to the same hospital, same doctor. So like the search function doesn't really help us. And so I made sure to avoid that whole kind of narrative, which is what we actually built our value on as a company initially, especially in the early days, because I knew with this particular company it wouldn't work. So I think that's where sales team members especially need to, their companies hopefully give them the confidence to kind of raise their hand and say, hey, I don't know if this approach is going to work for this particular customer. And then have a discussion with your manager or your team leaders or the executives. Say, hey, I understand this is what we're supposed to do, but in this case, I don't know if it's going to work because of 1, 2, and 3. And if you can support that kind of hypotheses, hopefully your leadership team will look at you and say, okay, this person did the homework. Actually, your approach probably makes sense. Let's go with it, and give them a shot to actually do it kind of their way if the other way hasn't working. I think that's where sometimes as a company, I don't want to say you have to let your people fail, but you have to let your team members try stuff to then see if it works, because if you don't let them try and you only continue doing things the same way, you're never going to know if that alternative could actually work and could open a new business for you.
How do you as a leader, Hassan, sort of encourage that? Because that's probably, especially for some more junior sales reps who've not been exposed to that, how do you encourage them to sort of to fail and fail quickly?
Yeah, so I think, the first step is to, like, number one, make sure they're prepared before they go out, right? Like, what I mean by go out is, like, whether it's on demos. A lot of companies today don't invest in coaching, and their sales teams are maybe too big. One manager is managing 10 people. It's very hard to coach the new reps along with the senior reps, and you end up relying a lot on your team members, which isn't a bad thing necessarily to help your team members grow, but maybe you're not in much detail. And so I think in the early days, what you got to do is do catch-ups frequently, especially with the newer team members, to make sure, hey, where do you feel comfortable? Where do you not feel comfortable? And then lead by example. I think, those first meetings, I'm not afraid to kind of take the reins to show them what good looks like. And you're never going to be perfect, even as a leader. Like, you're going to make mistakes. And what I try to get the new team members to do is, hey, what would you have done differently? And so when they're going back and watching the playbook or watching, say, a meeting, I don't want them to just watch the meeting and take notes along the way. I want them to pause at certain parts, and I'll ask them, hey, how would you handle this situation? Before the actual situation shows up in the real, the game film, so to speak. And so I think it's showing them that, look, there's no such thing as a perfect demo. You can have an amazing meeting that you lose the deal, and you can have a terrible meeting that you win the deal. It's true that sometimes you can't make a second first impression. Like, you mess up. So you got to own that. But if you're honest with your customer, and you can potentially overcome that. So one, it's, hey, as long as I'm prepared, I'm okay if I lose. What I try to tell the team is you should love yes. You should be able to handle no. What should upset you more than anything is maybe. Because the maybe means the customer is actually not clear about what your company does or whether or not you can help them.
Yeah.
And so if you're problem focused and you narrow in on, hey, what are some of the things that, where I always start the learning curve is, these are the problems that our customers experience today. And these are the questions you should ask to understand those problems resonate with your buyer.
Right.
Then get into what are features and what we can do. But if you start with, most companies unfortunately start with the features and the benefits and all the stuff about their product, and don't focus enough around the customer's problem that you're solving for.
No, totally agree. Look, discovery is absolutely the foundation of the whole deal. If you don't get a good sort of cornerstone of discovery, it impacts everything else. And one of the problems that I get pulled in a lot as a coach and a deal coach is, often if you look at the data, you see a big drop off after that presentation or that demo. So you got great pipeline, and then bang, it just drops. It just drops out.
Next quote.
And it if you unpack it, there could be a whole bunch of reasons, but the biggest thing I find, and it's a real problem for lots of organizations, is they're really poor at articulating the value of what they do, clearly differentiating themselves from the competition, articulating those 3 to 5 problems that they solve, and providing proof points. I mean, it sounds really basic, and if you ask anybody, they'll probably repeat what I just said, but do they do it? No. And if you can't do that, then guess what happens? The buyer, the prospect, is probably looking at a couple of other options, and they can't make a decision. So the only decision they can make on is the one thing, which is price. So, they go AWOL, they just disappear, they ghost you, or never to be seen again. Because when they're not clear, all they're going to do is go, give me a demo and give me a price.
Yep. And I tell the team, like, if you're in those meetings with the customers looking at, 3, 4, or say they have an incumbent, right? So a lot of times I'd always rather sell against an incumbent, a competitor, versus nothing. If they have nothing for what you're trying to sell them, that's usually, because the first step isn't convincing them of your product. The first step is convincing them they actually have a problem worth solving.
Absolutely.
If they've already solving that with something else, then your job is to then create a differentiator as to why your solution provides more value to their business than the incumbent does.
Yeah.
At least you've gone over that first. And sometimes, to be quite frank, it is price. But some companies, though, are willing to sacrifice certain features for a cheaper price. Other companies are not willing to sacrifice certain features for price. So you have to understand from that customer, okay, you're using X tool, what feature, what parts of the software like you cannot live without. And if you can't do one or two of those things, then you better be upfront in that first meeting. And I've done it before, like, hey, look, if this is your top priority, we actually don't have that feature. But these things that you mentioned, we do really well. But if that's one of your top ones, it probably makes sense for us to stop right now.
No, I love that, because to me, that's good selling. Is just look, it should always be about trying to make it easy for them to buy.
Yeah.
And they need to understand, sometimes I find two scenarios. Either they come to you because they're looking for a solution, and they're clear on what it is they need. Other times they come to you, but they're not clear what they need, but they know they need something.
Yeah.
Or they might have been told by their boss, go and find out, go and find me 5 vendors. Yeah. And so you ask them. So for me, what I always try and do there is like, what are the problems you're looking to solve? And I might tell you, great. And then if you can say, look, those 5 things you talked about, we do 3 of those really, really well.
Yeah.
2 of those not at all or poorly. Is that, if that's important for you, then you know what, we're the wrong fit. And just being, I call it the reluctant salesperson, but just being honest and say it would just not going to be, it's a really interesting thing, because the dynamics completely change. When you do that, how often do you see, Hassan, when they go, no, we want to, don't qualify out. We still want to work with you.
Yeah.
And
100%.
And then it's like, okay, so why are they saying that? Is it because they just need 3 quotes, or are those other things not maybe as important as they're saying? And it just flushes out the situation a little bit, which is really fascinating to see, isn't it?
I have a great story about that, actually. So it was a company that was coming to this market for the first time from the European and US market. And I met with the local CEO and his head of, I'm going to say she was head of operations, that came from New York. And we sat at a Starbucks. They didn't have an office. They literally hadn't even come to the country yet. They were just visiting, and they had connected with our CEO, and our CEO said, I think this company's looking to potentially move here. And so we went and met at a Starbucks, and within the first 10 minutes, probably 5 minutes, the CEO was like, yeah, I don't think this is going to work. I'm like, no problem. Like, this is what we're here for, so identify it. And we just continued to kind of discuss and kind of understand what they were trying to accomplish. And by the end of the 45 minutes, he was actually like, actually, I can see you guys helping us get from, because he had this vision of like going to 1,000 employees pretty quickly. And he's like, well, actually, you guys can help us probably get from here, A to say D. And we might need an SAP or an Oracle or whatever to get us the rest of the way through the alphabet. Mm-hmm. But for this first section, you guys actually seems like you do this really well. And we need that because we know nothing about the UAE market. So yeah, I think this is going to work.
Nice.
Right. And they ended up saying, well, that's of course, because his vision and stuff took maybe a bit longer for it to happen. Yeah. Instead of 1 year, 2 years, like he said, they were with us for 4 or 5 years until they got acquired.
Right.
And it worked out for all parties. Like they were happy, they didn't have to go vendor chasing. And it really comes down to your point, if you can just keep focusing on them and keep focusing on what they're trying to accomplish, you may end up figuring out that actually we are a fit. And then the interesting thing to your point that happens is when you pull back, a lot of times they end up trying to pull you forward, because it shows one, a level of confidence for you as a salesperson. It shows that you have the expertise to understand like what's happening in the market and where you fit and where you don't fit.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden you become like more trustworthy in a way, especially I think in the region where a lot of times people will oversell certain products or features. And so, I think that honesty is refreshing. And I think it's people respect you more and realize that, okay, I've told customers multiple times, if you're getting that price at that, with those benefits, do not switch. I've literally said that at meetings. And in some cases you find out that it's BS and they'll be like, oh, actually, no, well, they're actually getting it. And I'm like, Mr. Customer, let me tell you this, you are getting an amazing deal. Do not even think about switching.
Yeah. But it's just great because it flushes out the truth. That's what I would say.
Yes.
Because look, let's be honest, some of our prospects do tell fibs.
Of course.
And say things or, and it's a great way. If you genuinely believe what they've said, we can't do it, that you should say no. Or you qualify out because you don't really fully understand what they're trying to do. And in the situations where you've tried to do some discovery and they're just not telling you, they're not being open, that happens sometimes.
Yeah.
And particularly like RFP situations, but they say, look, you know what, we're qualifying out.
Yeah.
And it's like, why is that? Because we don't really understand what your real problems are. So we can't see if we're a good fit. So it's just not right that we continue. And again, that's just playing that rather than just going thinking, oh, are we all right? We'll do the RFP anyway. Or, we don't really understand fully their pain points, but I'll do the demo and then we'll see what sticks.
Yeah.
Rather than doing that, just saying, look, do you know what? I don't think we can continue. Because I've been in lots of meetings where selling to marketing or to HR and just those particular buying personas, I don't think like salespeople, and I don't necessarily. They're always, they're almost fearful of telling you things because they think you're gonna.
Oh, you're gonna use it against them, and
right, exactly. It's like, well, no, I just need to know what you're trying to fix.
Sorry, I'm not sure what happened there. Sorry.
No worries, don't worry. This is a live call, so it's just saying, look, we can't continue. We're gonna have to disengage, qualify out. Again, it's really an interesting dynamic because most people are scared of doing that. Most reps, maybe they're desperate because pipeline's low. We've all been there, but
they want to look busy.
Right.
That's a company culture issue too, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's more like the sales leader. If the sales leader just wants to I just want to see meetings on your calendar kind of thing, then he can't complain when the pipeline's full of hot garbage, right?
Absolutely. And I've been very lucky that my sales leaders were always, I'd rather you have one opportunity in a pipeline, Rick, and I know it's a real opportunity, than have a bunch of dross, which then suddenly falls out, at the end of the
quarter.
Pushed
to next quarter.
Yeah, or deals, you get deal slippage and all that. And hey, I mean, how common is that, deal slippage, things getting pushed out because people they're scared to have low pipeline. Yeah. They think having inflated pipeline is protecting them. But actually, if you've got the right boss, and I've been lucky, I've always had a very good sales manager who's like, qualify out. And he is the one who taught me more many, many times, even when I was like, I'm really not comfortable doing this. No, tell them we're going to write an email and we're going to tell them we're qualifying out because they haven't given us enough information for us to truly be able to, see what we're trying to fix and what we're trying to solve and align our problems. So why would we go through a sales motion when we're probably going to lose it anyway? Because we're clearly not a good fit.
100%.
And then sometimes they then go, okay, and then they tell you and give you more time. And I've seen that happen loads of times, particularly in RFPs where we've said we're pulling out.
And we have that with the insurance business a lot, actually.
Right.
Because very similar to where they want, we have to go get quotes from 3 brokers or 2 brokers or 4 brokers. And there'll be multiple, a couple times told customers, look, I understand working with one other broker, your existing broker, but to get a 3rd broker involved doesn't make sense. We'll bow out of the race, no problem. And we ended up winning many of those deals. But if you get into this bidding war, and ultimately insurance is commoditized, right? There's a certain percentage you make from the insurer. If that client is getting 5, 6 people involved, our teams, it doesn't make sense. And we've walked away from many deals because ultimately, the ones that can't articulate why they're talking to 3, 4, 5 people are the ones that for sure actually had zero intention to ever go with you.
Yeah. There's good lessons in that. I think sort of being the reluctant salesperson, qualifying out and being comfortable with you're not calling their bluff necessarily, but you're prepared to literally walk away, can be a powerful dynamic and actually change the game. I've seen that happen many times, but it takes a bit of guts, and it takes absolutely the backup of your sales leader needs to go, I'm backing you on this.
Yep.
Go for it. Okay, cool. So just going to wrap up on a couple of things. One is, let's talk very briefly about AI. So from your perspective, do you see, and are you even using any form of AI in your business to help with your sales in any shape or form? Love to just think of it as a little mini survey, just starting to ask people this.
I'm using it for account research, especially larger accounts that have more information out there. A competitor analysis. So I'll be asking, when we're looking at vendors, but also a competitor analysis for, say, us versus a competitor. I want to know differentiators between our product and it. Not really, I would say, it as a salesperson, but it's more of like creating in a different format that your customer may require. Also languages. I may not know language, depending on the person that you're speaking with, you may need to send it to executive team in another language. So AI has been useful there. I think there's a lot of tools that we're today looking at in terms of agents to help supplement our team, not to replace our team. I think there's a kind of a difference there. A lot of companies looking at, I can get rid of my sales team. But if you think about it, the tools today are good enough to where I can start a cadence and then mix in AI to help continue that cadence in my voice and my tone and my, everything. And so that actually I can start, taking customers through more of a comprehensive journey. Because the reality is today, when it comes to outreach, where I see most sales development teams or outreach teams fail, is just not taking enough swings. They'll make like one call a week, send one email every 2 weeks, and then just the number of touch points are too infrequent. And a lot of times they're weak. They're just, hey, I'm following up to see if you saw my previous email. I save I save every single incoming email I get from salespeople, and I share it with my sales team, and I say, hey, I want to show you guys what do you got, and then we'll grade those incoming emails based on the quality of did they do their research? Did they understand? And today's you have no excuse because AI can do that for you. You can literally put in a person's name, company, and pull their history, and it can give you a snippet.
They can do the heavy lift in the research. I mean,
exactly.
That's the research acceleration.
100%.
The time I would have spent researching, building a hypothesis and a point of view, I can automate a whole bunch of that and then go through it and then just tweak it and then off you go.
And if you're going to enterprise or public companies, that's forget it. That's next level game changer because you can read K1, you can read, the 10Ks, I should say.
10Ks, reports.
All the different reports, news articles. You can look up, hey, what's been said in the New York Times or whatever, Wall Street Journal. You can look at all these things with facts, with data point, and then create messaging, actually have the first version of the messaging come from the AI and then tweak it based on your company. And so the possibilities are endless. And there's a lot of people talking about this. There's a lot of people doing it, say, for their own businesses. And I think the expectation pretty soon from the buyers is going to be that if you can't at least approach me with that level of detail, why should I even listen to you?
Well, I mean, let's be honest. I think there was an expectation that you should be doing that anyway, but now you've literally got no excuse.
Now it's easy, 6 to 10 minutes.
Absolutely. I mean, I use Clay. I don't know if you use Clay. So
we use Clay actually at Bayzat as well.
So I use Clay for my clients just to go and, take that target list for the SDRs and it'll even just write the call scripts. So the call script will just be personalized. They'll have a template, but then personalized for those individuals. They don't have to do it. Just makes it a lot easier. So the account research is just a gift to take out.
And for the leaders of companies, I think you have to then figure out how to get that into your CRM, whether it's a Clay or another tool. And making sure that that's making sense of the data and then analyzing it against your existing, say, account base to ensure that, hey, these are high score because they match kind of our similar buyer personas. And I think if you start doing that, salespeople will be excited to prospect. I think the reason why a lot of salespeople don't like to cold call or don't like to prospect is because they feel like they're starting from zero.
Right. Yeah. And that's, I agree. And this is some of the things that I'm seeing and doing for some clients is there's a couple of areas to touch on there. So one, CRM's data degrades really quickly. So doing regular enrichment and feeding that back into HubSpot, Salesforce is really easy. I mean, I use Clay, but you can do all sorts of stuff with that.
Yeah.
And it's about giving them a belief. Salespeople, back to the old scenario, I've heard it's a really bad territory, and I've tried and it's not been good. If you can use something like Clay and other tools to go and scrape social signals, and then do lead scoring, which you absolutely can in Clay. It's great for doing that. And then go, right, we have taken your account list or your territory sales rep, and we've ranked your 200 accounts based on propensity to buy based on these signals.
Yeah.
Now at least they know where to go and focus. I mean, the six senses of the world are great.
Yeah.
But, they're pretty pricey, and a lot of smaller organizations can't necessarily afford to invest in that. But that is absolutely, because suddenly you've got, if you go and do that prioritization and then create a brief that says why they're a good fit and why you've scored them green rather than amber, and the sales reps got that, and they've got call notes and the briefing and the people, they're just a bit more confident and empowered to then put the call in and go, hey, George, how you doing? So, I noticed.
I'm sure you remember back when you were a sales rep, and same thing when your manager sent you a lead to work or an account to work, and they gave you, hey, I think this would be a good account because of 1, 2, and 3. Your ears perked up. You got excited to make that call.
Yeah.
Right. So I still try to send accounts to my team on a weekly basis if I can, just to say, hey, look at this account. This is why I think they're a good fit. They're buying this product already from us, etc. And so it creates that incentive to pick up the phone immediately.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that's kind of where, as a sales leader, kind of take yourself back to what things when you were a rep, and hopefully you've been a rep before you become a sales leader, what are some things that you used to get excited about? Right. And I always think about that. I think it's very hard for folks to come from other departments and become sales leaders if they haven't maybe done the work themselves. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I think it's definitely not as believable or relatable to the person, carrying the bag, so to speak, if you haven't actually done it. And that belief also goes a long way, because when they know, hey, this person sat in my shoes, they've executed it, they're not just talking from their, they're preaching from their soapbox.
I totally agree. Look, salespeople really value a sales leader who's been in the trenches and done this. And that's where, as a leader, from a coaching perspective, which is always difficult because you've usually got a million and one things to do. And if you're a first level manager, it's particularly challenging to give that coaching.
Yeah.
But if you get involved in a deal coaching and then you go, so what have you done? You're struggling to do this, struggling to do that. Okay, here's some things that I used to do. Try these out. You never know. Yeah. And you just give them some tactics or some ideas. And then they go and try them and go, oh, yeah, that worked great.
Yeah.
Then they're like, oh, all right, you've got some ninja skills, right? So
it's like a boost of energy. It's like, it's
yeah.
And they're like,
just get the best out of people. And it's a lovely thing to see when you do that.
Yeah.
And you see them react. And that's why I enjoy doing sales coaching, is just seeing that little something that they've reignited the spark and they believe again. Because look, selling, half of it is mindset. If you believe you can go and do it, it just makes such a difference.
Yeah, and you start doing it with purpose. We talked about this before, where it's activity with intention, right? Which is like, if I'm just going through the motions to make 50 dials, who's that helping, right? And how's that going to come across to your customer when you actually do a connect? So I think it's a big part of it is, hey, if I feel that boost of energy and if I know why I'm reaching out, and I have, say, a snippet from a Clay as to, hey, these are my kind of talking points and I can make my own, that sales rep is going in more prepared and more excited to make that call. And that tonality, as we know, is what, 43% of how we communicate, or 38% of how we communicate is tone. So your tone immediately changes when you have that feeling in your stomach, hey, I can do it.
Yeah, totally agree. Well, it's been a wonderful chat for the last hour or so.
Thanks, Rick. Definitely.
I'm gonna throw something completely random at you, which we haven't talked about. What could be one tip you could either share for sales leaders in a similar role, or a tip for an up and coming, new, fresh faced sales rep?
So I'll give you for the sales rep and for the sales leader. So maybe
Brilliant.
5
There you
sales
go.
leaders.
Bonus.
For the sales leader, I would just say 2 things. One is remember you were in that seat. And the second is just be their champion, right? Like kind of protect them. Like you know, don't look at them as just a number, like treat them as somebody that you want to see successful. And I think most of the good sales leaders that we have today are probably that way. But I think it starts with the first principle, which is remember you were sitting in that seat before.
Yeah.
I think it'll help guide kind of how you want to be coached and ultimately paying it forward. Hopefully you've had good sales leaders in your career that you can then pay it forward to those reps. As a sales rep, I think it's cliche to say just do the work, but I think it's, you know, what I always tell folks and what I interview for is know your numbers. And so even if you're starting out, there's got to be metrics to the point of the old days when I was cold calling 60, 70 doors a day and pulling business cards, is I figured out, okay, it takes me about 1 hour to hit 10 doors, which means if I need to hit 60 doors today, I got to spend 6 hours on the ground. And so regardless of how long that took, I had to do it. And so I think know your numbers, pay attention to those numbers early, and then start figuring out how to, you know, tweak those things. But my recommendation to folks is put your head down for 3 months, only come up for air if it's absolutely necessary. Grind, days should be long, days should be investing in learning the products as much as you can because your customers are going to feel if you don't know it. And then pay attention to what success looks like in the organization and try to, one, emulate it, but also figure out which parts of those people that you can take into your personality that feels natural.
Love it. Great tips. Great tips. So thank you, Hassan.
Thanks, Rick.
Lovely talking to you.
As well.
Great sharing the stories of being out there in California on the streets, hustling. I think that's
good times.
Put you in good stead, and you're clearly a great sales leader. So thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Rick. Pleasure. See you.
See you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Subscribe now to the Behind the Pipeline podcast.